Hello, Canucks fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Canucks Conversation, brought to you today by HSBC Rugby Sevens. HSBC World Rugby Sevens is Western Canada's largest sporting event, and this year is the 9th time the event has visited Vancouver as part of the World Rugby Sevens series. From February 23rd to 25th, grab your friends and your best costume and head on down to BC Place to catch 12 women's and 12 men's sevens teams, including 2 Canadian squads, take to the pitch for 3 full days of jam-packed rugby and partying. Tickets on sale now at vansevens.com, starting from just $40 per day. But that's not all. There's another way that you can head on over to Rugby Sevens. If you want to go, we have got a 4-pack of tickets for the entire weekend to give away. Text hashtag sevens, that's SEVENS, to 778-402-9680 for your chance to win. We will be giving away a 4-pack each week until the event. Text hashtag sevens to 778-402-9680. Harmon, I might have to text that number because I want to go to Rugby Sevens and 4 tickets. That sounds real good. So, folks, be sure to check it out. Enter our little giveaway. It'll be a lot of fun, unlike the roads right now. This is a remote edition of Canucks Conversation, as you can tell. My name is David Quadrelli. That is Harmon Dial. Our technical producer is Grady Sass, and our intern is Lachlan Irvin. I think Grady and Lachlan made the trek to the studio, but we did not. And Harmon, I thought about it because I've talked about it. I got a new car recently, and it's capable of handling the snow. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Canucks practice, and I'm also just going to go to the studio right after. Or I'll go home, I'll figure it out. But then something told me that the Canucks might have a long practice today. And sure enough, they did. The Canucks not got off the ice, but we didn't get audio until like 20 minutes ago. And we're recording this. We're a little late today, folks. Apologies about that. It's 2:07 right now. And the Canucks practiced for a long time today. It was a long Canucks practice between them being on the ice and the media festivities that happen afterwards. It was a long time that the Canucks were on the ice. So I know you were thinking about going as well. Thank God we didn't, because we probably would have been even later doing our show today.
Yeah, I sort of lucked out there because, man, I would have been pissed because my car's useless in this weather, if I took the hour to transit there, transit back, and because of the show, I don't even get an opportunity to talk to anybody after practice. That would have been not ideal at all, especially because I was up until like 2 a.m. writing. So yeah, definitely lucked out there. But I will say it was funny with the snow. I am kind of an idiot sometimes, so I fed my dog like I normally do in the backyard, and I didn't think to put his food bowl somewhere undercover. So I woke up this morning and my dog's looking at me because he wants breakfast. And I'm like, okay, great, pal. And I walk outside, and I don't know where his food bowl is because it's just all covered in snow. So I had to spend like 10-15 minutes digging the entire backyard up, getting rid of all the snow until I could find his food bowl.
So I've got a similar dog story, and we will get to hockey soon, folks. But Bert today saw snow for the first time. Like he saw the dusting like last week, but this was like like we got like 2 feet of snow. Okay, so he walks outside and he's shocked because outside the door it's shoveled, but then his pee spot was blocked off by like 2 feet of snow, and he was very confused how he was supposed to get over there. So he like looks up at me. So I carried him over the mound of snow, and we eventually got there. But he went to the bathroom, did his business. And then it was time for number 2. And I'm thinking, okay, whatever. He takes it, and instead of resting on top of the snow, it goes into the snow. Like it goes into the snow. And I'm like, well, I have to pick it up. I'm not going to leave it. So here I am with a bag on my hand, and I'm like digging through the snow, and I'm like, okay, it must have gone straight down. So I follow it to the source, and then I pull it up, and I've got this bag. My bag is full. It has the poop somewhere in there, but then I've got all this snow with me. So I'm like, okay, I'll shake off some of the snow. I go to shake off the snow, and sure enough, I drop part of the log into the snow again. So I have to go look for it again. I'm just sitting here with this bag, just doing this digging through the snow, and it was yeah, it was not a lot of fun, and I'm not looking forward to taking him out later this afternoon after this show. And people in the chat are asking about Bert. He's doing well. He's recovering well from his surgery. He's doing very well, and he really likes the snow, so that's really nice. He's enjoying it quite a bit, just like we're enjoying this team quite a bit. Harm. The Arizona Coyotes are in town tomorrow. We will be breaking that down on tomorrow's show, but for today's show, and you and I last night after we wrapped up our show yesterday, you said to me, I don't want to talk trade deadline 100 times before the actual trade deadline, because we're still like 2 months out of the trade deadline. It's March 8th. March 8th is the trade deadline. Still a ways to go. I don't want to talk trades. I don't want to talk about that today. The other thing we didn't want to talk about was Elias Pettersson, because for some reason, everybody was just diving into the Elias Pettersson discourse yesterday and all this. Will he sign? Like, maybe he's not going to sign in Vancouver. And you and I talked, and we don't really want to talk about that. So the happy medium we found was to further dissect the quotes that came out during yesterday's show that we briefly touched on. And those are the quotes from Vancouver Canucks general manager Patrik Allvin, who spoke with Ian McIntyre of Sportsnet. And there was so much good stuff in this interview that I really wanted to get to it. Grady says he needs a second for the quotes. We had a little technical difficulties, folks, at our studio, because, like I said, Grady and Lachlan are both in studio, so we had some technical difficulties today. I don't know exactly what it was. All I know is Grady was very panicked right before we were supposed to go live, and that's why we were late. And yeah, Grady says he needs a second or two, so get your anyone else's in, folks. Let's start with Canucks practice, Harm. There was not a lot going on at Canucks practice today, but all of the All-Stars spoke. And you might think, like, yeah, these guys don't want to go. I don't think we got any of that today, but we were kind of expecting to see, someone not want to speak, but all the All-Stars spoke today. And it was, it was interesting. And Jeff Patterson's going to have the whole breakdown from Canucks practice up on CanucksArmy.com shortly. But sorry, I'm jumping all over. Okay, Grady says he's ready. Okay, let's get to it now. The quotes from Patrik Allvin yesterday. Harm, the first one that I want to bring up is Patrik Allvin's quote about Teddy Bluger, because he was asked by IMAC, 6 trades, 5 free agent signings. Which one are you most pleased with? And, he lists off Casey DeSmith, Ian Cole, Sam Lafferty. But then he says, I think the one guy is Teddy Bluger. I don't think he gets as much attention as he should. How professional he is every day, how he goes about his business every day to prepare for the next practice or next game or next whatever. I think Teddy has shown this group a lot. That's last part about Teddy Bluger showing the group a lot. That's the one thing that I think has actually gone under the radar, because I think we've given Teddy Bluger his flowers. We've talked about him as being perhaps this team's biggest unsung hero, but I want to pick on myself a little bit, Harm, because the other day I was talking about how this team doesn't have a ton of playoff experience, and I said, yeah, you've got Ian Cole. How about Teddy Bluger? Like, Teddy Bluger doesn't get mentioned in that last part very often about having the playoff experience, about showing the group things as more of a veteran presence. And I think every time we give him praise, we're talking about, yeah, we didn't think he would be this good offensively, and him being able to be a key cog on that third line, the best third line in hockey. That's what we usually give him praise for. But I didn't even really put the two items together, that this is a veteran voice that's been there, done that in the playoffs, and is going to be able to provide that to this group when it comes playoff time.
Yeah, and I think he's really well liked in the locker room too. That's definitely the vibe that I've gotten. It reminds me, honestly, a little bit of Brandon Sutter, just in the sense that there are a couple similarities there. Both of them are very sort of boring interviews in the on the record sense. If you just go and talk to them, a lot of hockey cliches, both Sutter and Bluger, but behind the scenes, they're actually both really funny. Like, I don't think a lot of people know how much Brandon Sutter was loved in that locker room because of how lighthearted and funny he is. And we didn't get a chance to really see that very often. I know there was the one Canucks video, I want to say back in 2019 when he did the Air Canucks, interviewing all the other players. And I don't think Bluger's quite as outgoing, but it was funny. I was talking to Dakota Joshua on the last road trip about what are the different personalities on the team and just some of the dynamics on these road trips, especially when they fly the team charter. And he's like, Teddy Bluger tells jokes on the charter, apparently. And Bluger was right there. I'm like, wait, what? I wouldn't have taken you for a guy that just tells jokes like that and is super lighthearted. And he joked and he's like, yeah, those jokes are for when you guys are gone. And so that was really insightful for me, because it sort of gives you the sense that, okay, yeah, he's professional. Yeah, he knows how to play the right way defensively. He kills penalties. He does a lot of those details that I think are appreciated on the ice, and off the ice. He's a great example of that. But also, he's just a really likable player, really likable personality and character. And so that was something that I learned over the last month or so that I didn't know when he first joined this team.
That's a really good point, Harmon. I really like, yeah, I think it's the most under discussed thing. And it's really interesting that Allvin kind of pointed that out. I think he's talking more about how all around he's under discussed, but I think we talk about him more than enough on this show. And like I said, I think we give him his flowers, but that's the one aspect that we haven't really dove into when it comes to Teddy Bluger is the playoff experience and all of that. Quickly, before we get to the next quote, I want to tell you one Brandon Sutter story. I think I've told this before, so longtime listeners of the podcast might know it, but when Brandon Sutter was out with that year where he was still signed to the team, but he had the long COVID, he would come to games every now and then, and he would sit in the press box. And it was when I was doing the Wheels and Doors story. I don't know if you remember this, Harmon,
Yeah.
but I did the story on Wheels and Doors, and I was asking, are there more wheels or are there more doors in the world? And more people ended up saying wheels. Bruce Boudreau told me he counted all the doors at Rogers Arena, and I didn't tell him I was doing this. I randomly asked him the question, and he said, you know what? I counted all the doors last week, but I'll say wheels. And I was like, all right. So anyways, Brandon Sutter, I go up to him and I was like, hey man, like, I don't, I hope you're feeling well, all that. And him and I were just chatting, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm working on this story just about wheels and doors. If there's more wheels or doors in the world. He goes, huh, that's a really interesting story. And I was like, yeah, well, it's like a trend, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, can I be part of it? I was like, yeah, dude. Yeah, no problem. So I was like, are there more wheels or doors in the world? And he's like, I'm always picking up kids' toys and those always have wheels on them. So I'm going to go wheels. And I was like, okay, like, I know you're injured. Like, are you okay if I quote you on that? He's like, no, quote me on that. I'm sure of it. And I was like, all right, cool. So Brandon Sutter was a part of my story in the year that he was injured. Jeremy Lee wants us to asks this, and we'll get to a lot more in anyone else, but this is anyone else that we'll get to early before we continue this segment. Any more cool Canucks stories that aren't as well known in public circles? I'm trying to think of one that I can actually tell, because like I have one that comes to mind, but I can't tell it. Like it's a breach of trust, right? Like that's the thing is these guys trust us. We trust them to some extent as well. And we can't breach that trust. So I'm trying to think of a story that I could think of that doesn't cross any lines, because the one that I have is like, it's nothing bad. It's like nothing bad. It's just an embarrassing moment for a player. And I don't think they would appreciate me relaying it on the podcast, because we've all had embarrassing moments that we wouldn't like broadcast it out there.
I think I've got one. This is he won't mind me telling this one. So it's my rookie, or it's my first year covering the team, 2019-20 season. It's November late, and the team's in Edmonton, and this is also Quinn Hughes' rookie season. It's a year where they finally started to be competitive again, and so this was the game where Louis Eriksson scored an empty netter. I just really fondly remember that. Canucks win, big win on Saturday night. We go into the locker room, and this was still at the point where I've only covered the team for like a month. I haven't really built many relationships, so I'm pretty reserved, shy, whatever. So we do post-game interviews, walk out. And because it's my first time in that Rogers Place building, I'm lost. Like, I don't really know how to get back up to the press box. I'm just sort of hanging out by locker room. And Quinn Hughes, this like shy, reserved guy as well, comes out of the room, gives me like the biggest pat on the shoulder. He's like, hey, what's up, man? And then I tell him, I'm like, I don't know how to get to the press box. And because it's his rookie year as well, he's like, honestly, I've been trying to figure out the rinks as well. And he tells me the story about how in Pittsburgh, he got totally lost in the rink there. And then, so we both ended up sort of walking for a few minutes, and he asked me about what I write about after games and that sort of thing, but I just thought it was really funny that the picture in my head of Quinn Hughes getting lost at PPG Paint's arena during his first road trip there. That was pretty funny.
That's amazing. I love that. And those are the stories that we can tell. And I remember one time, vintage Canucks Convo. This is long time listeners of Canucks Convo know this one. When Faber used to have guests every week, he had Dan Murphy on the show once, and he asked Murph to tell a funny story during Elias Pettersson's rookie year. And it was Elias Pettersson wondering why Linguini wasn't just called Fat Spaghetti. Or it was like, it was very funny because Murph just came up with that on the spot. He was like, yeah, on the team charter, Elias Pettersson was confused what fettuccine was. And he said, why isn't it just called fat spaghetti? Because that's how it was explained to him when he was still learning English, of course. They just said it's basically fat spaghetti. He's like, why don't you just call it fat spaghetti then? Anyways, let's continue the segment.
Tell it. One more really good one came to mind. So this was an on the record interview I did with Quinn during the 2021 COVID year. So this was over Zoom, and this was like a subscriber Q&A. I had basically gotten and collected the best questions from athletic subscribers and told Quinn, hey, this is just a lighthearted, fun interview. It's nothing serious. And one of the questions was because him and Pettersson were rooming at the time because they were both on their entry-level contracts. And the question was, what's Pettersson like as a roommate? And earlier in the year, PD had given it to Quinn for being a messy roommate, apparently. So I think Quinn was like, all right, like I can unleash on PD now. And so he tells me that apparently PD always wanted to have, or really regularly wanted to have like late night convos about just like whatever. And Quinn would, I guess, just sort of at a certain point get distracted or go on his phone or just be checked out of the conversation at a certain point. And he's like, if he didn't engage, PD would legit then give him the silent treatment and get super and like take it really personally. And so I thought that was really funny.
Thoughtful guy, that Elias Pettersson. Okay, let's continue this Allvin segment, which we should also mention is brought to you by our friends over at 4 Winds Brewing. Family owned and operated in Delta, home to the 4 Winds Light Lager, a crisp, clean, and easy drinking beer. A beer for everyone. A perfect beer for before, after, or during the game, or during some late night conversations with Elias Pettersson. Ask for 4 Winds Light Lager at your local liquor store or have some delivered right to your door through the online shop at 4windsbrewing.ca. Those were great stories, Harman. I love it. I'm gonna try to think of some more. I got a few from the Zoom era, but nothing spectacular. So I'll save it. That's a really solid question, Jeremy. Thank you for that. And we'll get to more of your questions in the anyone else segment. But let's continue on here, breaking down this interview that Patrik Allvin did with Ian McIntyre. Okay, this one, we wrote an article about this at Canucks Army. Patrik Allvin talking about being aggressive at the trade deadline. I think, Harman, given what you and I have talked about recently, this is the answer you want to hear. IMAC asked, with your team obviously having a chance to win, will you be aggressive ahead of the deadline? Allvin said, well, I think I owe it to the players. The players dictate how good we are and how they're buying into the way we want to play. We know that they are capable of playing at this high level, and if they continue to do that, then it's on me to make sure I support them and give them opportunities to be successful. I love that quote. And again, I know it's not anyone else, but I really like this comment from Nick P in the YouTube live chat. He said, what will cause more drama in this market? Giving up assets to go all in and then failing in the playoffs, or not adding anyone and regretting not adding the extra pieces? I know I can only speak for myself, but based on what I've been saying recently, and just this is how I feel about this team at this point, is I would only be upset if this team didn't add. If this team adds and fails in the playoffs, it happened, right? Like, if they add big time and it looks like it's a great move, and most of the moves they've been making, when they make their move, when they strike, they've been good so far. So I can't see I can't see them making a move that makes any of us go, oh, that's the wrong piece to add, right? Like, maybe the critique would be you didn't add enough, but if they give it their best shot, and I already spoke about going all in yesterday, so I'm not going to do it again. But if they add and then fail in the playoffs, I'm not going to be blaming management for that. Are you?
I think the only way would be if they sold the farm essentially on a rental that they're not able to keep. I think that would sting. If it's a short playoff run, you're losing this guy. And then as you're looking at a scenario where Pettersson and Hronek are going to be more expensive, you've got a bunch of other expiring contracts, then you may regret not having those assets to go out and trade for other pieces that might help the roster moving forward. That's the only scenario where I think sort of going all in would warrant potential criticism from the market.
Sure, but what do you mean by selling the farm, right?
Like if
that. Go on.
I guess if you give up, let's say, a first round pick and like and one of your, let's say, top 3 or 4 prospects, and it's for a guy who doesn't move the needle, is a poor fit, let's say, down the stretch in the regular season in the playoffs, and you get bounced early. Like that's a move that didn't work out. Clearly, that would draw some criticism. It would.
Sure. But I don't think that was the question. And I don't want to dive into one question from a listener too much, but like I'm looking at it as they add, and then despite the ad being a good one, they fail in the playoffs. If it's a miss on pro scouting, then yeah, they're going to get criticized for that. But I don't think if you go out and get somebody that helps your team, but they still come up short in the playoffs, I don't think they're going to get criticized for that. At least they shouldn't, in my mind.
This is Canucks Twitter, man. Don't underestimate this fan base.
Fair enough.
There are always people on both sides.
That's very valid. Let's get to this next quote. It's from Allvin talking about Andrei Kuzmenko in relation to the trade deadline a little bit. I know we touched on it briefly yesterday, but here is the full quote, and there's a few full quotes here from Patrik Allvin. Can we get this up, Grady? There it is. Okay. Nope. Almost. Other one, Kuzmenko. Okay, one sec. I'll pull it up on my computer. Okay, so bear with us, folks. This one from Sportsnet. How concerned are you about Kuzmenko's struggles this season and that a $5.5 million player has been a healthy scratch 5 times? Allvin said, if you look at it, he's a second-year pro in the National Hockey League. Although he's older, we know the second year is tough. We've become a better team and we want to play a more structured game. I would say I'm very pleased with his last few games. I think Kuzi understands what he needs to do in order to stay in the lineup. IMAC asked again, have other teams been calling you about him? Allvin, obviously, he's a hell of a talented player, and teams are definitely checking in when they see a guy like that is not in the lineup. Is what to do with Kuzmenko the biggest decision you have to make before the March 8th trade deadline? Allvin, the players usually dictate where they fit and how they perform and all that. Tocchet is a puzzle guy, and we want to make sure the puzzle works, so we talk about different ideas and things, and then we'll see where things go. Arguably the most interesting quotes from the story, Harman. Not shutting the door on a Kuzmenko trade, but also not shutting the door on what Jim Rutherford a few months ago called their preference, and that is that Andrei Kuzmenko figures it out and plays well, and Allvin's happy with his last few games. Arguably the most interesting quote from all of this.
Yeah, and I think as you look at this Kuzmenko situation, it is going to be interesting to see if you're going to go out and acquire top 6 forward, are there ways to add that piece cap wise without sending a contract back? Because that might be the scenario where you may just have to include Kuzmenko to be able to afford a bigger salary. I'm not sure what cap gymnastics are available to them, but right now, according to Cap Friendly, they're projected to have $1.2 million in deadline cap space. And now there are creative ways to get around it. We've seen teams at previous deadlines, the whole third-party broker became a buzzword where you double retain, and now all of a sudden the guy's cap hit is shrinking a ton, and maybe you run with fewer than 23 players on your roster, which frees up a little bit more flexibility, and you're able to add that piece without sending a bigger salary like Kuzmenko back. But I think that's one of the biggest questions that comes to mind for me initially, is not just about the merits of Kuzmenko and his individual fit, but clearly you want to add to this team. Can you do that without sending a contract back? I think that's going to be something to watch for. And then if it's not at this deadline, unless there's a dramatic turnaround, you figure there has to be a resolution in the offseason, because with some of these contracts that the Canucks are going to have to sign, some of these rising costs, expiring free agents, having to plug in holes, you can't really afford to have $5.5 million that is not being put to is not being maximized in its usage. Every dollar counts for the Canucks, and I think that would be the type of contract that you might look at and go, all right, we want to find a better way to make use of this capital.
I like it. I like it. The whole Anthony Beauvillier from the Islanders. This final quote, Harman, from this interview as we wrap up this segment here. It's the one that's got the market up in arms. Patrik Allvin on Elias Pettersson. Is there any change in Elias Pettersson's situation? Any signs of negotiations resuming? Allvin, I have conversations with his agent, but nothing obviously has changed. We want to keep Petey here. He knows that at some point it's going to come down to negotiations and if it's working or not. We have another year with him as an RFA. We're not going to lose him this summer. But that being said, I'm trying to plan for our team this year and next year, and I want him to be a big part of it. IMAC followed that up by asking if it, in Allvin's experience, it was a little unusual for a star player to kind of hold off like this. And Patrik Allvin said, yeah, maybe a little bit. Called it a little bit unusual. And I think that quote is the one that really has the market discussing. Like, I've seen people say, like, okay, well, if you have to trade Elias Pettersson, what do you want to get back for him? And I'm like, come on, it's way too soon for that. And your colleague, Thomas Drance, had a really, really sharp column, I thought, in The Athletic about why it's not time to worry about Elias Pettersson's contract with the Vancouver Canucks. And I think both of us kind of share that sentiment as well. And you brought up a name in David Pastrnak that is kind of relevant to this situation as well.
Yeah, I've consistently brought it up even this past summer when everybody, before Pettersson had done that interview with Friedman, said that he wanted to wait till the end of the season to negotiate and really sign his next contract, that if you look at Pastrnak, who was also repped by JP Barry of CAA, their playbook was really interesting. And I think Pastrnak gained a lot from that situation. And basically the timeline for that was on July 1st, not last offseason, the offseason before, in 2022, the Bruins tried to sit down with Pastrnak and they wanted to hammer out a long-term extension right away. Pastrnak wasn't willing to do it. And I think part of it was wanting to see what the future of the team looked like with Bergeron, with Krejci. It was definitely, it looked like it could be a transitory stage in the Bruins timeline. And okay, are we going to be a good team? So those negotiations were sort of put on hold. Boston got off to this terrific start in the middle of a historic regular season, sort of like the excellent start the Canucks are off to right now. And Pastrnak continued slow playing it, and he didn't put pen to paper until right before the trade deadline. And keep in mind, there was even more urgency with the situation because Pastrnak was an unrestricted free agent. So he was only months away from literally being able to walk. And that worked to Pasternak's advantage because that gave him an opportunity to put up even bigger numbers. The more favorable cap comparables came in, and he got a very clear direction of, okay, the future in Boston, at least in the short term, is still pretty bright. I can feel comfortable about committing here. And from Pettersson's situation, he's made it very clear since that interview with Friedman that he wanted to wait till the end of the season. And why would you not? First of all, he gains so much information by waiting through this season about the direction of the organization, his confidence in the coaching staff, management. These are his prime years. This is arguably his most important window the next few years in terms of the next contract. Why would he not take as much time to make an informed decision, especially when he's an RFA? Second, and this is the part that I don't think a lot of people are maybe looking at as much, is last offseason, Pettersson's negotiating power probably wasn't quite as strong because he'd only been a 100-point player once in his career.
Yep.
Keep in mind that before that, Pettersson had never been a point-per-game player. So him going out and doing it again and potentially being in the Selke conversation, I saw Jay Fresh did a poll of NHL fans, and Barkov was second, or Pettersson was second in Selke trophy voting behind Barkov. If you're a centerman that can put up back-to-back 100-point seasons, and you're potentially going to be a runner-up in the Selke conversation, being able to put together a second elite season that helps him individually in terms of his leverage, his contract, and what he can command. And then third, you see more favorable comparables like Nylander rolling in. And so given all that, why would he rush to make this decision? So I'm not worried about this situation at all, because throughout this entire process, it's made sense for him to wait.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really don't think anything's changed. And someone said in the chat here, I have to find who it was. Corey Anderson said, the fan base has lost its mind when Thomas Drance is the voice of reason. Usually it's the other way around. No, I kid, of course. But that's it for the Allvin quotes. I found all of those really interesting, and I wanted to make sure we talked about them. We're going to continue this conversation a little bit here. We're going to start anyone else with a question about Elias Pettersson. That's right, folks. It's time for anyone else, your chance to get involved and hit us up in the YouTube live chat. And it's also our listeners' chance to get 25% off and 0 delivery fees on their first order of $15 or more when they enter the code NATION25. That's all capital letters, NATION, and the numbers 25 on the DoorDash app with your first order. You get 25% off with that code. With Double Dash on DoorDash, you can order from multiple restaurants or stores in the same delivery without additional delivery fees, so everyone can get what they want and need. Be sure to go check it out. DoorDash, that promo code again is NATION25. Okay, this one from Nar, who comes in with some heater questions. I actually like this. It's a tough question. On a spectrum from selfless team player to self-centered prima donna, where does Elias Pettersson lie? And I know the wording might be a little bit harsh here, but I gave this one some thought during your answer there, Harman. And I think what I've come down to, well, the conclusion that I come to in my mind, is that I think he might be... You might be able to make the argument, yeah, he's worried about himself more than some players in the NHL. Sure, I'll listen to that. But what I ultimately come down to is Elias Pettersson's one of the most selfless team players on the ice. And I think that's where it matters more. There was a sequence earlier in the year where JT Miller scored that goal. I can't remember who they were playing, where JT Miller came off the bench. And that was in the heart of the Canucks being tired and hearing all this stuff about how they need to keep their shift short. Elias Pettersson changed in the O-zone so that JT Miller could come down on the ice. JT Miller in his postgame gave Pettersson all of the flowers there. Like, he was talking about how that was a very selfless change by Elias Pettersson. And no matter what his contract situation is, I think that's what I want to highlight the most, is that he's a very selfless team player in that locker room and on the ice. Just because he won't commit to this organization right now because he wants to get everything he can from them in terms of dollars, which why wouldn't he? Like, that's another thing. I mean, I heard this brought up with the Cutter Gauthier thing as well. And I think obviously the situations are different, but NHL players don't have a lot of opportunity to make a lot of money in their NHL career. And I know compared to us, sure, but like compared to other athletes, they don't have a ton of opportunity just with the way the CBA works. You look at when players are going to get to free agency, all that sort of stuff, what they make on their ELCs, all that sort of stuff. They don't have a ton of control in their careers. Even as an RFA, you don't have a ton of control in your career. So I don't blame a guy like Elias Pettersson for exploring every avenue that he possibly can to get as much money as he possibly can on this deal. I don't think that makes you a self-centered prima donna. I really don't. I think the thing that matters the most is how you play on the ice. And I think Pettersson's a great team player on the ice. And I think that's what matters a heck of a lot more.
Yeah. And I also don't even think it's just about maximizing every dollar. It's also just the simple fact that, before the Canucks got back on track this season, let's be honest, this franchise was a bit of a disaster. There was so much turmoil, so much dysfunction. And so if you're in Pettersson's situation and winning a Stanley Cup, not just one cup, but chasing multiple cups matters a lot to you, which it also matters a lot for a ton of franchise players across the NHL that care about their legacy, that care about how they're viewed by their peers. why would you not want to make sure that this is as stable a situation as possible before you commit your long-term future during your prime years? Because he's what, 24 now, 25? This is smack in the middle. By the time his next contract expires, he's going to be in his late 20s. And at that point, it's not that players are mysteriously going to fall off, but if you want to be the guy, if you want to be the franchise player on a Stanley Cup winning team, you're generally going to get that done in your mid to late 20s for the most part. So
And let's not,
that's
yeah, sorry, continue.
no, you want to chime in.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, let's not forget that before he signed this bridge deal, he was talking about how he just wants to play somewhere where they're winning. So this isn't like a new thing for Elias Pettersson that he wanted to do a bunch of winning. And prior to this year, they didn't win over that bridge deal. So he didn't lay it out like this. So I don't want to put words in his mouth. But if the criteria for him signing long term after this bridge deal was okay, how much winning have we done over the bridge deal? The answer is not a heck of a lot, right? And look, I'm willing to listen to the people that come out and say, well, he's part of the solution. I think we've seen this year that the biggest issues, and Daniel Wagner, shout out to him, had a really solid column on this about how the biggest issues with the Canucks teams over the years has been their weak links and their bottom six and all the issues they've had all over the roster. And, you know, that was done by Jim Benning. Like, Jim Benning was holding back this team quite a bit, and we all know that. I'm not going to repeat it, and I'm not going to get any debates about it. It's not even a debate. I look at this situation and say, yeah, like, I understand where Elias Pettersson's coming from. And again, neither of us are pushing the panic button. We didn't even want to talk about it. We ended up spending a lot of time talking about it, though.
One last thing also, the Canucks had their chance to lock Pettersson up long-term on his last contract. And it's not just the cap, the lack of cap space excuse. Yeah, that was a contributing factor. But at that point, Pettersson was 100% open to the idea of signing a longer deal. And I think the Canucks front office at that time, outside of just the cap concerns, weren't totally sold on Pettersson. That's what I have heard, and what a lot of other people have reported, that it wasn't just cap reasons. Part of it was also, we want to make sure that we're 100% certain here that he's the guy, the franchise player, that he can be the best player on a cup winning team before we give him a massive 6, 7, 8-year contract.
Yep, exactly. And that's, look, I think people pointed out at the time, I'm not going to rehash it, but that was a little bit of backwards thinking. If there were any doubts about what Elias Pettersson was going to be in this league. And look, I know he's had slumps, and I saw someone yesterday pointing out, oh, well, I don't want to give him money because look at the slump he had this year. I thought it's been made crystal clear that slump was almost entirely because his wingers were doing absolutely nothing. And like, you've seen what that second line's doing, even with Pius Suter, a guy who was going, like, Pius Suter was going to some extent before he got put on that line with Ilya Mikheyev and Andrei Kuzmenko. But those two wingers, they have really, really struggled this season, and not even Elias Pettersson could dig them out of it. And I think that's saying a lot about that line and what they're able to do right now. Okay, this is good. Let's get to some more anyone else's. This one from Corey Anderson. I think it'll be a short answer for both of us, Harman. Personal question for you guys. Does the Canucks being relevant give you guys a level of excitement about your jobs and writing that's been missing in the past few years? Short answer is yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not fun talking about a miserable losing situation year after year after year. I mean, how many times can you rip into roster construction, the bottom six, the blue line? It becomes just so repetitive.
That was the problem that we always had, it felt like, and I tried to avoid as best I could during those lean years when it was like, we all know what the issues are, and fans are getting tired of hearing it every single day. And the thing I used to joke about with Faber was, I listened to 4 shows today and they all said the exact same things. And this is the 5th time this week that they've said all of those exact same things. So you always want to try to keep it fresh, but it's hard. Like, it's not easy to come up with fresh ideas to talk about when the team isn't doing well and really had no direction at that time. They've got direction now. They're doing well now. Of course, yeah, it's much nicer. Okay, this one from Karan. Given how high the shooting percentage has been for the bottom 6, Joshua, Lafferty, Höglander, is it another reason to be proactive at the deadline when the regression for those guys eventually comes?
Well, I think that's just part of the bigger point that you don't know when everything is going to go right for you as a team again. In the sense of your core has been relatively healthy. I mean, look at how badly Vegas has been hammered by injuries. You see so many teams around the league. New Jersey was supposed to be a contender this year, right? Beat the Rangers in round one, young up and coming team. They've been hammered by injuries. They lost a couple players in free agency, which might happen to the Canucks, and they are struggling just to get into a playoff spot right now. Uh, the Leafs, another example, they lose a few guys in free agency and they're not able to hit on their depth signings on all of them. Now all of a sudden they don't really look like contenders. Yeah, they're going to make the playoffs, but they don't really look like a serious cup threat. So yeah, I mean, you don't know when the stars are going to align for you again. And part of that is, yeah, the bottom six, you have a ton of guys that are producing at levels that may or may not last. Like Blueger's got 18 points in 30 games. His previous career high is 28 points. Like, am I expecting him to be that type of player year in, year out? Probably not. If he even re-signs in Vancouver, similar sort of thing with Joshua as well, Lafferty. So, yeah, it's part of the everything is going right for this team, and that doesn't always happen on a year in, year out basis.
Also, Corey Anderson pointed this out with going back to the thing about Elias Pettersson and his slump. That slump was 20 points in 22 games. So he was still putting up the points during that slump that people are talking about. So, anyways, I really like what you just said, Harman. I find that really interesting because it kind of goes back to the conversation that we had yesterday about striking while the iron's hot, right? And giving this team the tools that they have, they need to succeed in the playoffs. And again, we just heard that from Patrik Allvin when we broke down his quotes there. Okay, this one from Rajcraft. I'm interested here on your thoughts on this one, Harman, because I don't know the player too well. What about targeting Jack Roslovic?
I don't think he'd be a fit at all for under Rick Tocchet. He's got flashy skill. Sometimes he has the ability to make highlight reel plays, highlight reel passes, and he'll have heater stretches where he'll go off for like 19 points in 19 games, and you're like, wow, this guy's got game-breaking skill. But he's so inconsistent. He's cut from the same cloth as Kuzmenko, honestly, where he is not responsible defensively. You worry about the puck management. And you have to remember that Columbus, for the longest time, was so desperate for finding top six centermen. I mean, they cycled through so many different players. I remember when they acquired Max Domi, and that was a flop. And Roslovic, of course, was originally part of the Dubois trade. And he's never found a fit there. It's always been hot and cold for Roslovic there. And my thought process is, okay, if you aren't able to stick it as a top six centerman on one of the worst teams in the NHL, what makes you think you're going to be able to do that on a team that has aspirations of being a contender? So I don't think he's a fit at all, even stylistically for what the Canucks are looking for, probably in a centerman. Ideally, it'd be more of a two-way, well-rounded type player, and I just don't view Roslovic as that type of player at all.
Jesse C asks, who votes on the Selkie? The answer is the hosts of this show, both members of the Professional Hockey Writers Association. The Professional Hockey Writers Association is who votes on the Hart, Norris, Selkie, Lady Bing. What's the other one we vote on?
Did you mention Calder already?
No, there it is. Calder. Those are the 5 awards that we vote for. Then we vote for the all-star team or whatever. Like the all-star team is what it's called. And then the GMs vote on the Vezina and the broadcasters vote on the
Jack Adams.
Jack Adams. There it is. Yes. Thank you. So early, but number 1 on my Selkie, I'm not sure yet. Like, I don't know. And again, I know it's not Elias Pettersson to this juncture.
It's
You and I had this
Barkov.
Conversation. It's got to be Barkov, right? Like you and I had this conversation off air. Yeah.
He's been so dominant. I think, like, I remember when Florida was coming into Vancouver and Florida had outscored teams 28-9, just like only 9 goals against for that line the entire season. And you've seen what Barkov's been able to do for Sam Reinhart as well. Reinhart having a career year on Barkov's wing. He's been incredible.
He has been. He absolutely has been. And it was funny because last year, so I had Patrice Bergeron number 1, and then I had Nico Hischier number 2, and that ended up being number 1 and 2 of the award. And in my mind, I was like, well, it's Nico Hischier's award to lose then. Like he's gonna win it every single year. But then Barkov comes out and has the year he does. Yeah, it looks like it's gonna be Barkov for the Selke.
Give me 10 seconds to get my laptop charger. It somehow fell from like 86% to 16 in the matter of just doing the show. So 1 second.
Okay, you go through that. I'm going to go through and talk about my votes here for the other awards that we vote on. Look, I know it's halfway point of the season. Like I said yesterday, everybody is putting out their kind of picks for each award. So I thought that'd be fun to do. We're probably going to do our entire ballots on a future show. And again, it's our half season ballot. But Norris, I have Quinn Hughes there. I've had him there all year. But Cale Makar is making a real case to take the Norris away from Quinn Hughes once again. When you look at points per game, Cale Makar's 1 point behind Quinn Hughes, and I think he's played 6 less games or 4 or 5 less games. It's not a huge number, but the points per game rate is higher for Cale Makar. And look, like we know Cale Makar is the best defenseman in the league, and that Quinn Hughes has been making a strong case to be considered in that same conversation with Cale Makar. But Cale Makar has done it year in, year out. And again, as much as I joke about being a giant Canucks homer, I don't think Quinn Hughes has this locked up as maybe we thought he did back in October and November when we were having these discussions, Harman.
I disagree, actually. I don't think Makar is close right now. He is close in terms of the point totals, but overall two-way play, Makar hasn't been as sharp this year. You look first at the underlying numbers in controlling shots, controlling scoring chances. His impact hasn't been nearly as strong as Quinn Hughes, and you can see it in the sense that with Cale Makar on the ice this year, the Avs are only +4 at 5-on-5, and that lines up with the play driving numbers being good but not elite. Whereas with Quinn Hughes, I'm going to quickly pull this up right now. The numbers are pretty bonkers in terms of how lopsided the Canucks are winning minutes. Yeah, the Canucks are in comparison +29. With Quinn Hughes on the ice at 5-on-5 compared to +4. And of course, I do think that in Hughes' case, he's benefiting a little bit from he's riding like a 106 PDO, and the Canucks are shooting 15% when he's on the ice at 5-on-5. So it is a bit inflated, but even just watching him play, his overall impact, two-way results defensively, has been superior to Makar. So Makar's close enough that if he has a monster second half, yeah, he can get back into the conversation. But I think the gap between Hughes and Makar is bigger than the point totals would suggest.
Really interesting, because I was looking at it, and I guess I need to dig further, and obviously I will before I submit my actual ballot. But the thing that I kind of come down to is we know Colorado's had their struggles this year. Like we obviously heard Devon Taves call out the team and all that sort of stuff. We know they've had their struggles. I'm just curious in the second half, because I think what we've seen, Harman, is we've seen Cale Makar recently start to be more part of the solution. Like I'd have to go look again. I'd have to go look at his splits, but just from what I've seen, taking the quick look at it and watching the Avalanche when I do, like I feel like he's just started to be part of the solution with what was looking like a pretty bad situation in Colorado earlier in the season. I think he's been a part of the solution. I wonder, like, again, like you said, it has to be a huge second half for him to really, really close that gap. But I just don't think it's a shoe-in at this juncture that Hughes is just going to walk away with the award.
Yeah, I just don't think Makar was the usual Cale Makar in terms of his defensive play, pocket management, all of those details. He was still racking up points, but his overall impact, I don't think he's been as sharp.
Fair enough. Okay, I like this one. This one from Nar. Would you rather bring on Cody Hodgson or Terry Ryan as a black ace this spring? I'm going to go Hodgson. He's younger. I've given the Hodgson take before, and for those that didn't see it, Hodgson signed a PTO. I thought it was called an ATO, but a PTO with the Milwaukee Admirals, who he finished his NHL career with after he signed with the Nashville Predators in 2015. He finished out his career in the AHL, and he's back. He's back, and he's only 33. He's turning 34 on February 18th. I only know that because I wrote an article about him and know that his birthday is pretty damn close to mine. So, yeah, Cody Hodgson. I'm going Cody Hodgson. Bring him in.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty screwed if if you end up going that deep down your roster that you have to lean on any of those guys in potential playoff games. But yeah, I mean, like you said, he's younger, so we'll give him the thumbs up there.
Yeah, Arshdeep Baines is wondering what the hell he has to do to get a shot when they announced the Terry Ryan signing, the 49-year-old Terry Ryan signing. Arshdeep Baines can't get in. Okay, so was there another one else? I think there was one more. Let me see. Actually, no, I think that was it. No, I like this one. This is from Jesse C. This will be what we close it out on. This is what we'll close it out on. New defense award, the Bobby Orr Award for the top scoring D-man or most proficient offensive defenseman. Then the Norris can be more like a Selke. And you basically what it's suggesting from Jesse there is that you split the two. You have an offensive defenseman award and a defensive defenseman award. I like that idea. I like that idea because I liked that our pal Thomas Drance gave Chris Tanev a Norris vote a few years back because he absolutely deserved it. He's one of the best defensemen, one of the best all-around defensemen in the league. And hey, you just brought it up. Like I look at Cale Makar and I think he's going to get votes for the reason that I just pointed out, that his points per game is higher than Quinn Hughes. And there's still going to be a lot of people around the league that are voting on this award, Harmon, that look at Hughes as an offense first defenseman and are going to say, well, he's not even leading in the offensive category, so I'm going to give my vote to Cale Makar. That's going to happen. That's going to happen.
I think this year the big difference is the narrative is working in his favor with the Canucks finally being this breakout surprise team. That was the point I made last year, was Hughes is going to fly under the radar because the Canucks are terrible and people are just going to assume that don't watch Hughes play that part of the reason the team is struggling is because he's not very good defensively. Whereas now he's the captain of this team that is eating through the NHL. Like, teams don't underestimate the impact of team success in the story and narrative that informs voters' decision making. That will definitely be working in his favor. Not to mention there is voter fatigue, and I think everybody has like Cale Makar's gotten his due. So I think to a certain extent, people do like giving new players their flowers, as you would say. And I think Quinn's fully deserved it. And I think voters around the NHL will recognize that, hey, it's this guy's turn to get a spot in the to get an opportunity in the spotlight.
I like that. And I like that you're going into the mind of an Eastern voter, because I think you're right. Like, I think you're right to some extent that the team's success is going to help out. Like, if you overtake the league, like we saw Erik Karlsson do from a points production perspective, yeah, you're probably gonna be the one that walks away with the award. But when you're winning and you have the reputation that Quinn Hughes has had, you're right. Like, this is a year where his reputation is obviously going to start to turn. And look, I think a lot of Eastern voters saw that Dom stuck his neck out and now has had to admit that he was wrong about Quinn Hughes. I think a lot of Eastern voters are going to see stuff like that, and his reputation is going to change. And I think this is the year, obviously, where it changes.
Well, you know how hard it is to get Dom to admit he's wrong? It's that and he was denied hard through the first couple of months. So yeah, if Dom is having to change his mind, I bet a lot of Eastern media are waking up right now to Quinn Hughes being a Norris caliber defenseman.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, the chat wants me to vote Evgeny Kuznetsov for the Selke. It's not happening, folks. It's not happening. You're not going to tell me who to vote for.
All Russian ballot with Kuznetsov, Kuzmenko.
What the
Ovechkin.
hell is Kuzmenko winning? The Lady Bing because he doesn't throw a hit?
This is our anti-Selke ballot.
Anti-Selke. Oh my gosh. All right. Let's get to our Betway Bet of the Day, brought to you by our friends over at Betway. I don't even remember what I put in there, so this will be a trip for all of us. Oh, also, yeah, okay, let's get to our bet. It's the Montreal Canadiens to beat the New Jersey Devils tonight at plus 150 odds. A $10 bet will return you $25 over on Betway. It must be 19 plus to play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly over at Betway. I wanted to update everybody. My pick hit in Wendy's Daily Faceoff Survivor game last night. I'm up to day 3, which is tomorrow's games because there's only 2 games on the NHL schedule tonight. I'm going on to round 3. There's 4 rounds. Tomorrow, I picked Devon Toews to pick up a point. He just needs to pick up a point, a single point, and I'm on to day 4.
Who are they playing?
I can't remember. I think it's the Leafs. I'm not sure. Let me check. I remember looking at it and saying, "Oh, okay, it might be a low-scoring game." And I think the most popular, the Bruins. The Bruins. They're playing the Bruins tomorrow.
Ooh. Okay.
So
Swayman's been hot.
the most popular pick, Harmon, is for him to get under, like no points, to get 0
Yeah.
points. But he's got an assist and then a goal and assist in his past 2 games, respectively. I like it to continue. I like the 3-game point streak. Devon Taves on my wagon avalanche.
We'll see. Swayman's been unreal, so you got a tough test there.
Yeah, 8-2-0 in their last 10 is the Avalanche, and that's what I was alluding to when I talked about, Makar potentially getting a lot of the credit for the turnaround there in Colorado. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm sticking with it. I think I'm sticking with it. I might have to go rethink that. But you're right, Jeremy Swayman. Speaking of guys who, who have made it hard for Canucks to run away with awards, Jeremy Swayman is obviously going to be right there as well. All right, we will close it out there. For my co-host, Harmon Dial, and our technical producer, Grady Sass, my name is Dave Gugelli. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Canucks Conversation.
Canucks Conversation with Harmon and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher